Have you ever wondered about the story of Abraham's first son, Ishmael? Most of us know the name Isaac, the promised child, the miracle born to Abraham and Sarah in their old age. But long before Isaac ever came into the world, another child had already been born into Abraham's household. His name was Ishmael, and his story is far more dramatic, complex, and moving than many people realize. Today, we are going to step back in time, back to a world of deserts, tents, and divine promises, to explore the life of Ishmael as told in the Bible. His journey begins not with celebration, but with longing and uncertainty. Picture Abraham, a man already advanced in years, holding on to God's mysterious promise that one day he would become the father of nations. But at that time, Abraham had no children. His wife, Sarah, had faced the pain of barrenness for many years. Together, they wrestled with the unspoken question, how could this promise from God ever come true? And then, something happened that would change everything. Sarah, weary from waiting, suggested a solution that was common in the ancient world, but one that would open the door to tension, heartbreak, and divine intervention. She offered her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, to Abraham, believing that perhaps through her, God's promise might finally come pass. This is where the story of Ishmael begins, a child born not only of Abraham's longing, but also of human impatience. Yet even in the midst of struggle and conflict, God's hand was at work. As we journey through Ishmael's story, we will see moments of jealousy and rejection, but also of divine care and blessing. His life would shape nations and influence the course of history in ways Abraham and Sarah could never have imagined. So let's begin this story, not just as readers of ancient history, but as travelers walking alongside Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, and Ishmael, discovering how their choices and God's promises continue to echo through time. Backhand index pointing right, and with that, let us move deeper into the heart of the story. The moment when Hagar, carrying Abraham's child, finds herself in a struggle that will set the stage for everything that follows. But in Genesis 16, verse 3, Sarah, who is still called Sarai, suggests to Abraham, who is still called Abram, to have a child with her Egyptian maidservant Hagar, whom she gives to him as a wife. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. Genesis 16, verse 3. This seems to be a common custom of the time, since Jacob's wives also resorted to it. The wife offers a servant to her husband, but all children born from this union are considered hers, which would be an early form of surrogacy. In antiquity, it was common for a barren woman to offer her husband a servant who would bear children in her stead. It was the wife, not the servant, who raised the children. If this solution may have seemed judicious to Abraham and Sarah, it created more problems than it solved. Hagar did indeed have a child with Abraham. When Hagar learned she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarah, and Sarah sought help from Abraham. Genesis 16, verse 4 states, "So when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarah said to Abram, 'My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me.'" Genesis 16, verse 4. Abraham allowed Sarah to act as she wished. Sarah then mistreated Hagar, who fled from her. Sarah, being barren, had obtained a son from Hagar, and Ishmael was legally Sarah's child. However, this does not explain how Sarah treated Hagar. A few years later, God established a covenant with Abraham, requiring circumcision of all male members of his household. God commanded Abraham to circumcise his son Ishmael, as well as all other men in his household, including slaves born in his household, and those acquired from foreigners. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael was 13. The birth of Isaac, the legitimate son of Sarah and Abraham, exacerbated the already strained relational tensions between Sarah and Hagar. Indeed, these had begun long before Ishmael's birth, as mentioned previously. It was in the desert that the angel of the Lord met Hagar and ordered her to return to Abraham. It was also there that the angel of the Lord told her the son she was carrying was to be named Ishmael. What does Ishmael mean? It means God has heard. Indeed, the Lord heard Hagar's distress. Genesis chapter 16:1. However, the discord between Sarah and Hagar reached its peak at Isaac's weaning. Deeply upset, Sarah asked Abraham to send away Hagar and her son. Abraham considered Ishmael the son God had promised him. Indeed, even when God revealed that Sarah would bear a son, Abraham questioned the need for this birth, since Ishmael could be his heir. In Genesis 17, verse 18, Abraham says to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." Even after Isaac's birth, Abraham continued to treat Ishmael kindly, saddened by Sarah's desire to disown him. Sarah, for her part, saw Ishmael as a threat to Isaac's place in the family and wanted to get rid of him, Genesis 21, verses 1 to 34. This request to expel the maid servant and her son seemed to contravene all norms of ancient law. The children of maid servants could be demoted but not dismissed without valid cause. The fact that Abraham resisted such treatment, only acting on God's command, suggests the action undertaken was not in accordance with the standards of time. One may wonder about Sarah's reaction. Was it because of an act committed by Ishmael that threatened Isaac, or was it simply his existence that posed a threat? Genesis 21 verse 9 tells us, Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Does this mean Ishmael was mocking Isaac or merely playing with him? Does the word scoffing in this context mean mocking, deriding, or simply rejoicing in the situation? Sarah perceives Ishmael as a rival to Isaac, not because of any act he may have committed, but because of his very existence. The author of Genesis recounts the story of Ishmael, mainly to establish a contrast between Isaac and Ishmael, not as individuals but as representations of God's work. The idea is that when God kept his promises to Abraham, he was not constrained by natural and ordinary laws. In other words, by the flesh. Although God's preference for Isaac as the son of the wife conforms to custom, the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael made the contrast more striking. Hagar was sent away with her son into the wilderness. Genesis 21 verses 10 to 14. Therefore she said to Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac." And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight, because of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. They were about to die of thirst when God heard the boy and provided him with water. However, God still had plans for Ishmael. He assured Hagar that Ishmael, as Abraham's son, will become a great nation. Genesis 21 verses 17 to 18. The fulfillment of this prophecy is reported in Genesis 25 verses 12 to 18. Ishmael had 12 sons who became powerful leaders and eventually a nation. Here is how it happened. Hagar, who herself was of Egyptian origin, chose an Egyptian wife for her son, and Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, Genesis 21 verse 21. They dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, as you go toward Assyria, Genesis 25 verse 18. He had 12 sons and 1 daughter. The Bible lists Ishmael's sons in Genesis 25 verse 13, and these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, then Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. Surprisingly, he is credited with 12 sons just as Jacob had 12 sons. This compares to the 12 sons of Nahor and the 12 sons of Esau. Later, Ishmael's daughter married Esau, Isaac's son, as indicated in Genesis 28 verse 9 and Genesis 36 verse 3. The region of Havilah, where Ishmael's descendants lived, was in the north part of the Arabian Peninsula. It was a desert region between Sheba in the Negev Desert and Egypt. Isaiah 60 verse 7 mentions the descendants of Nebajoth and Kedar as sheep breeders. Ishmael's descendants were called Arabs, which basically means nomads. From the beginning, Ishmael's descendants were a warring people, as they lived in hostility toward all their brothers. Thus was fulfilled God's prediction that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers, Genesis 16 verse 12. Later, Other peoples settled in the Arabian Peninsula, including descendants of Abraham's sons by Keturah, 1 Chronicles 1 verses 32 to 33, and some descendants of Esau, namely the Amalekites, Genesis 36 verse 12. Even though Isaac alone remained Abraham's heir, Ishmael and Abraham's other sons by concubines were also blessed by him, as Genesis 25 indicates. This means that Hagar's sons, as well as Keturah's, received material goods from the patriarch. Once grown, the Bible reports no conflicts between Ishmael and Isaac. They are both described as burying Abraham at Machpelah, Genesis 25 verse 9. Most of these names are mentioned in other passages of the Bible as influential tribal families of that time. Ishmael's descendants, Abraham's son, are generally identified as Ishmaelites in the Bible. They were organized into 12 tribes living in movable camps in the southern desert, Genesis 25. Ishmael died at the age of 137, Genesis 25 verse 17. The Bible does not specify where he was buried, but Muslim tradition places his tomb at the Kaaba in Mecca. In the New Testament, Ishmael is mentioned specifically by the Apostle Paul. The apostle used a figure of the slave woman's son in his allegory, contrasting the legalistic religious persecutors with those born according to the Spirit and enjoying freedom in Christ, Galatians 4 verse 21. Ishmael became a relatively common name, so other characters are mentioned in the Bible as Ishmael. There was, for example, a descendant of Saul and Jonathan named Ishmael, as well as a high official under Jehoshaphat's reign, and the son of a priest at the time of Ezra, Ezra 10 verse 22. But among all the individuals mentioned, the most well-known was the son of Nethaniah, a member of the royal house of David, Jeremiah 41 verses 1 to 15. During the period of Babylonian oppression against the Jews, this Ishmael killed Gedaliah, the governor of Judah appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. As we step back from this remarkable journey through Genesis, we see that the story of Hagar, Ishmael, Sarah, and Isaac is far more than a family conflict. It is a mirror reflecting the tension between human impatience and God's timing, between promises made by human schemes and promises fulfilled by divine power. Think about it. Abraham and Sarah tried to solve their problem by giving Hagar to Abraham. And yes, out of that union came Ishmael, a child blessed by God but not the child of promise. Yet God did not reject Ishmael. He heard the cry of the boy in the desert. He blessed his descendants, and he made them into a mighty nation. Ishmael's story reminds us that God's mercy often extends beyond what we expect, reaching even those on the margins, the outsiders, the forgotten ones. And then there was Isaac, his birth, against all odds, to parents far beyond childbearing age, prove that God's promises are not bound by human limits. Where Ishmael's life shows us that God sees and cares for those cast aside, Isaac's birth shows us that God fulfills his covenant in his own way in his own time. But notice something even deeper. When Abraham died, it was not only Isaac who stood at his grave. Ishmael was there too. Two brothers, separated by history, tension, and destiny, were united, at least for a moment, in honoring their father. Doesn't that image strike something within us? Two lives, two nations, two destinies, and yet a shared root. The New Testament later reflects on this story in Paul's letter to the Galatians. Paul contrasts Ishmael, the son born according to flesh, with Isaac, the son born through promise. He isn't condemning Ishmael, but he is pointing us to a larger truth, that the promises of God are fulfilled not by human striving, but by grace and divine power. And here's where it speaks to us today. How often do we, like Abraham and Sarah, grow impatient and try to force God's promises into reality? How often do we take matters into our own hands, only to find tension and pain? Yet, even in our mistakes, God does not abandon us. Just as he heard Hagar in the wilderness, he hears us in our moments of desperation. Just as he brought life through Isaac against all odds, he can bring hope and fulfillment in ways we never imagined. So, when you think of Ishmael, don't only see him as the one who was cast out. See him as the boy whose name means God hears. Remember that in your own wilderness, whether that wilderness is loneliness, struggle, or doubt, God still hears. And when you think of Isaac, remember that his very existence is proof that God keeps his word, even when the world says it's impossible. The story of these two sons is not only a family drama, It's a divine lesson. It's about promises, patience, mercy, and hope. And it leaves us with a question worth carrying. When faced with waiting, will we lean on our own understanding, or will we trust the God who hears and the God who fulfills?